feedback or questions, and I might have questions as well. I know there's at least one question I have about AU sample time immediate or whatever, like, and using that in a test. I kind of have a question about that I'll bring up afterwards. So, but yeah, so I guess there's a couple things like, so one is like, this is my little scratch pad, and I'm gonna sort of like, unceremoniously sort of switch between what I'm sharing. And so then if I go over to Xcode and share that, you can tell me, did you see both of those things that I shared? Like if everything looked okay. Like I can't show them both at once because I don't want to pay the money for like Zoom rooms, and I didn't like whatever the RTMP server that I set up was like super slow. It was actually faster for me to like, it was like better bandwidth for me to like connect my iPad to Zoom and my computer to Zoom and have both of those shows like faster than like using RTMP on my local network without really tweaking it. So
I saw them
that's
both.
where I ended up. Yeah. So
Yeah, we can see them both.
yeah. What's that?
We can see them
Everybody
both.
saw them both, yeah.
Great. Cool.
So
Yeah, all right.
do you just have a camera pointed at your iPad there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It kind of has a cool glow to it. I like it.
Nice, cool. Yeah, I like
Fair
that too. I sort of like, I really like fluorescent colors, so I tried to make it. It's really dark over here, but it glows, I think, just right in the camera. So I wanted it to look good in perpetuity. So yeah. So let's see the sequencer. All right. So I'm gonna not necessarily. I'm not gonna show it, but I'm gonna on my side jump over to the issue. It was like V5 sequencer cannot play notes at same position programmatically. And so this was a bug, I guess, brought up. And the way that I went about it is I grabbed the sample code that was uploaded by Max Sutovic. And let's see, if I go to Xcode, I took his code and then turned it into somewhat different, which was, I grabbed like a, let me see. So, yeah. So his was it had a storyboard. I removed the storyboard. I made it into Swift UI, and then I dragged AudioKit into it. And let's see. I'll get to that later. So then let's see. Audio Manager. I think Audio Manager does it. Yeah. So there's this class called Audio Manager in this example that was provided as a reproduction of the bug. And so in the example, I sort of converted it a little bit. So in here, basically, we like make an engine, make a mixer, make a sequencer, and in the original one, we made a sampler. So then, and I ended up making a callback instrument so I could like see some logs and generally sort of like kick stuff off. There was some settings that were set for whatever that was unrelated, and then in my callback thing, I'm just like grabbing the bytes and printing it out. And let's see, so if I run this, let's see if I can run this simply. You'll see some logs first. I can also do it with the sampler so that we can hear it like in piano. Let's see, that's that. And then let's see if it's, yeah, it seems like it's doing something. Okay, build succeeded. Oh. All right, so it's loaded up in my simulator, but I'm only sharing my Xcode screen just because I think it will be sort of simpler. Oh, maybe not. Let me see. I'll share the whole. I'll share the whole thing actually. I'll share my whole desktop one. Group. Okay. Let's see. So there's MIDI. So you guys can see that. So if you can't see it, just let me know. And then so there's a MIDI file. There's a sequence that's sort of put in place. There's a sequence in this file, which are what these functions are set up to do. So like set up the sequencer, we add a bunch of notes to the sequencer directly, which was, I didn't know if I should add them to the tracks to get a better thing or whatever. But so this was how the sort of reproduction was given to me. You add a bunch of notes, and then they play, and then there's also like load a MIDI file and play. And so I made sure that the notes here were the same notes that are in the MIDI file, first off, and I made sure that they were in the same sequence. And so then, and we can dig into that too, if people are like, prove that they're the same, but they're pretty much the same. And let's see if I run it in this thing. So then we run the MIDI file, and what you see is like, if we can see this here, 3 note ons, 3 note offs, 3 note ons, 3 note offs. And so what's happening here is like 3 notes are being played, and they're running, and then they're being shut off, and then three more notes are being played. So it's like chord, 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 four chords. And so this looks like it is what you would expect, which is like three ons, three offs, etc. And that's just like four chords over, whatever, 12 bars or something, or whatever, 3 bars or something, 4 bars. It's a chord per bar. And so then if we run the same, if I clear that and then run the sequence, which was that other stuff I showed, you can see here there's a difference, which is you have ons and then more ons and then offs and then more ons and then an off and then on and then off. And so that's like, maybe that doesn't make that much sense because we have notes get triggered on, and then and so those are like playing in the first bar, and then you have these note ons for the next chords, but then you have these note offs, right, for the last chord that was on. So the first chord plays, and then it's shut off here, and then with the MIDI file, these three offs happen like, sort of in sequence. So you get the ons and then the offs and then the ons and then the offs. Whereas in this one, you're getting the ons first. So that is not the behavior that we want in this case. So if I uncomment the sampler, and let's see if I can do this quickly. I'll try
Can I
to.
ask one question here?
Oh yeah.
What are the numbers on the left? Is that sample offsets?
Oh, yeah. Those are. Let's see. So from here, this is like, I think I might have recently put this in there. It's just a timestamp that I grabbed, like any given timestamp here.
Right.
So this was that, and I think that this right here is like, because I have a couple different versions on different branches, so this was just like random. But yeah, so those should be in order, I think. Yeah, they look like they're in order. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but that's what that is. They're not. It was like that part of it wasn't super important for me. It was sort of just the sequencing of it, because what happens here is that we have 60, 64, and 67. Then we have 60, 65, and 69. So 65, 69, 64, and 67 is to say everything but 60 triggers fine, but 60 doesn't play on the second chord. So that one of the notes of the three notes in the second chord doesn't play, which sounds like a polyphony issue if you're just like doing it and you're like, oh, it won't do polyphony. But really what it is sort of more of a sequencing of note ons and note offs issue, the other thing here, the test sequence here, where I'll show you the sequence here as it plays, and it's this one. So I add note 60 at 0 and at 2, and then I have 59 and 62 at 4, both at once. So this one plays, and then this one plays. So this is like, it would be legato if it was two different notes, but it's the same note. So you can just say it's a successive note of the same note number. And then this one is like a polyphonic dyad or whatever, and then this one is 4 at the same time for the same length, right? And so, these two, I believe, in this case, like should be correct, right? So, but this setup, this sort of successive notes of the same number, like doesn't happen correctly, in that you have an on and then an off, and that's for like, it should be like we have the second off here, right, which is the end of the second note that we added, but the beginning of the second note, I know this is kind of like, I don't know, let me know if it sounds really confusing. I'll try to do something different in terms of explaining it, but essentially these are switched around. There's a lot of ways to sort of consider MIDI and notes and the event sequencing, which it's obvious in the sequencer that it was thought about fairly deeply. And this is kind of an edge case. So this is one edge case that's like probably a very common thing that happens in general. But in this one case, we want, the off for the playing note 60 to trigger before the note on of the scheduled note 60, and we don't want the on to be triggered for the scheduled one before the off for the playing one is triggered. So I can get into some code here. So like in the sequencer,
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, go for it.
So typically, it's my understanding when you send some MIDI note to whatever synthesizer, you
Right.
send it redundantly, the second one doesn't do anything. Is that right? Or maybe
Yeah, I'm
maybe
not.
it changes
Yeah.
you could change the velocity or something with it.
Right. Right.
But it's not like you have to go like note on, let's say note 60, everything's note 60, note on, note off. And
Right.
then in order, you don't have to send two note offs in order to silence the note, right? Like it doesn't
Right.
keep,
Exactly.
it doesn't,
Yeah. Like you. Yeah. Sorry. Go
whereas
ahead.
I guess maybe with MPE it's different, but
Yeah.
with normal
Yeah.
MIDI,
Totally.
like with normal MIDI, there's essentially just like everything's Booleans. A note is either on or off. A given note is either on or off. It doesn't keep like it doesn't like allocate a new voice every time you put a note on. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Exactly.
Um,
Um, totally. So this is where we kind of like I think we get into the weeds, and so like I thought I would sort of start with MIDI. I can mention MPE because you mentioned it. I think it's an important thing now as well. Obviously, like so with MIDI, um, you have you have this sort of like a data pipe, right? And you think of like MIDI is usually a serial protocol or whatever. Even over Bluetooth, it's still sort of a serial protocol or whatever. So you're sending these messages. We already know this. This is obviously some of this is review for you guys, but like so this is a stream of single messages that ends up being like on a piano roll. This is my like horrible piano roll, but on the piano roll you could have multiple messages for a note, and they're gonna that note as you see it on like usually on a piano roll is gonna be two messages, right? So this might be like the on, and this is the off, right, of like one note or whatever.
yeah.
Now, that's the idea. Like, okay, great, that sounds cool. We got polyphony, right, through MIDI. But in MIDI, one note in a MIDI message situation is not polyphonic. So, or just like it seems like generally it's not really like a thing that was cared about or whatever. So, this is like super sort of weedy stuff. So, um, for a given note, like if this is the sequencer lane, right, like in a piano roll, right. A note here and a note here and a note here of the same note, um, you can't actually stack two of the same note on top of each other like that. And this isn't something that necessarily everybody's going to do, but if you do go into like Ableton or Machine or any other DAW like Logic or whatever, and you put a 60 on top of a 60, generally the DAW is going to have to deal with that situation or whatever. So
I mean, that was my question basically,
yeah,
right?
right, exactly, exactly
60,
that.
60, 60, 60 on, 60 on, 60 off, 60 off. What is
You
the
exactly.
semantics of that?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so I think often what happens is they're either going to say, okay, no, this is actually just one note, right? Or they're going to say, no, it's just the first one. Or it's going to like, cut off the first one, even though it does go there, and then just play the second one, right? So you have kind of like different, and those aren't probably all the options. Like, I don't know what all
Well,
the options are, but
have
this
you
is kind of
tested
like,
the different, did you test the different DAWs? I just do what would Ableton do.
oh, totally, totally. That makes sense. I mean, in the, in, in our case, I actually see like to some degree that we could do like we don't have to necessarily think about it. We can what our problem here I think in the sequencer is more that well okay so I guess like the base thing is like what would Ableton do, and then there's also like what happens with just MIDI stream, right? So if I just have a MIDI controller that's like sending stuff as I do it in real time, not even thinking about necessarily like what the DAW does, if I press a note and then on another controller send another note and have actually do it physically, like I'm just going to send the notes in order, right? It's just the notes, the messages. The messages will just happen in order.
You mean like you
Which
have
is sort
two,
of
like you have two MIDI keyboards.
right,
You're saying, middle C on one of them and then middle C on the other,
exactly,
right? You
exactly,
generated that stream of two note ons of the same note on
right,
the
right,
same
exactly.
channel.
Yeah. So
It
then,
doesn't
so let's
doesn't
just say
kind of
like
like, but doesn't what would Ableton do apply to that too? So you just send those into Ableton, you
right,
send them out to your MIDI monitor, and you go, well, what did Ableton do with that? Whatever, I'm sure
right.
they've thought this extensively. Just copy whatever
No,
they.
no, totally, exactly, exactly. So I mean, I can actually pull up Ableton and do it, but in interest of time, though, I feel like there's a sort of even simpler sort of way to look at it, which is just that we don't want to color or like be opinionated about this necessarily in the simplest case, right? We just want to make sure that the things go in. I don't know though. That maybe that's up to you guys. It's like it's like I think it's less of a choice as more of it's like, okay, does it happen in order correctly, or like if we think like, are these notes like going to my MIDI interface in the orders that I've sent them in, right? So this is like sort of, is it accurate to like what's happened in reality? And that's, if you press this, and there's an on, I don't know exactly the best way. Let's say circle is on, right? And here's the first thing that happens. I press this key on the left, right? And then I press this key on the right. So there's another on, right? So when that hits the MIDI thing, we have an on and an on, right? Now, if I let go of this, it's going to send it off. And in the general thing, like in this case, like we're talking about MIDI streams or whatever, this off will actually just shut off that note because it's just a message saying, here, deal with this. And then if you let go of this key here, then you get this one. This one's off as well. So that's like the sort of like, as far as I can understand, that's the true order if you were to do it like in general, just with like multiple MIDI devices happening, right? So if I've got two sequencers that are sending stuff to my DAW, like two step sequences or whatever, this kind of thing is sort of what I would expect both of those things to do if I had the same note triggering at the same time. So we're going to have like an artificial sort of stopping of this note, or this, what we think is going to happen here. Like we think that there should be a note here, but this will actually stop when this note off hits because it's just one channel. And so it's an off on that channel. It means that that note is no longer playing or whatever. So in the case where we just interpret messages directly, that would be the behavior I would expect. And then in the case where we sort of take it to another abstraction level and say, oh, this is a note, how are we going to interpret the note? Then we get into kind of what we're doing in the code with sequencer, which is cool. So that's like sort of what would Ableton do. This is what it would do. It would sort of look at like, I have a note off for the same thing, but that one's still playing. And, so does that mean that I kill the first note and don't play that second note, that whatever. So like that sort of choice, or that like opinionated sort of abstraction, or whatever you call it. Like I don't mean opinionated in a negative way. I just mean like you have to figure out to do something. So what would Ableton do? So that's what I think Ableton would do. What I think Ableton would do is that they would pay attention to like, if I get a note off for a note that's playing, and I also get a note on for that note that's playing, then I should shut it off and then re-trigger it, right? Which is sort of like, I think that that's fairly logical. What do you guys think of that? So like, let's look at some of the code here. So like,
so I just tried this in Logic.
Oh, okay, cool.
I put one long quiet note and then one short loud note on top of each other, and they play as you would expect when they're separated. But when the long quiet note is encompassing the shorter note,
right,
what happens is the long quiet note starts, and then when the short loud note starts, it makes the long note loud and
okay.
keeps the same length.
So did you put like
totally wrong, but that's what it does. Yeah.
That's what you did. Okay, so this is like, so we're gonna say this is the same note, right?
Yeah.
And then you have this one, which is like velocity, whatever, like 64, and then this one's a whatever. This one is more like a 90 or something, right? So that's what you did, and then you said that this one gets louder.
Yeah,
and then keeps playing.
It stays loud until the quiet one is set to turn off.
Interesting. Okay, so then it did something where it like paid attention to what was playing and only took the sort of like non-note information from here and then merged it into what was actually happening, right?
Yeah, it said when it probably saying we're going to ignore all note offs until the last one within this range.
That's kind of what I was saying earlier with the a redundant note on can change velocity.
Yeah,
totally. That makes sense.
Recollection about that. I don't know
right.
why.
No. Well, because I think maybe at least there is another thing that's associated, which is that some hardware doesn't send a note off message; it just sends a zero velocity note on message for that note.
Yeah, I've seen it too.
And so that all of this sort of comes back, I think, like to this sort of essential thing about MIDI, which is this, that like a single note isn't polyphonic, right? So you have to kind of decide how you're going to deal with that when you have more than one of those notes coming at whatever's interpreting those notes.
Yeah, I guess just as an actual data model for a sequencer, I don't really like MIDI events.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Of course, because you
Because
want to
of
think
these
about it
because
like
of these
anything.
ambiguities, right?
Yeah.
Like the data model should be something closer to what you as the user have authored,
Mm-hmm.
or
Totally.
what is very clearly representable by the piano roll or whatever other interface you want to
Right.
use,
Right.
right?
So then
Um,
in that case, you'd have something that was like tracking what notes are on and which ones are going to be on and shut off, and you don't ever have that problem of like, you know, the events from the same note idea, like the note sort of abstraction,
yeah.
it doesn't get interfered with by this sort of like MIDI message ordering stuff, right?
But the AK sequencer is just has MIDI, a list of MIDI events and timestamps. Is that how it? That's the data
Actually,
model.
well, what's rad about it is that actually it's close to that. So in we can kind of get. I was going to do a little like high level overview of how it all works, but with like on a quick summarization, we eventually get to this. I think it's a C++ function, and it's inside of sequencer engine. Let me share this. Um, so share it again. Okay, so back to Xcode. So there's this the file sequencer engine.mm, right, which holds the actual function that gets called eventually. Like there's a scheduling function, and then there's like the actual that's sort of the scheduling function is like part of the observer, et cetera, et cetera. I was gonna go over that later just for like, hey, this is how it works. But for now, this is where it gets processed, right? So I can just quickly this sequencer engine, class, which is a struct. Like this class has this struct has a property, which is this thing here, playing notes, right? So it's a vector that this engine keeps track of what notes are playing. So I think I see that as like that's essentially an attempt to do what you're saying, Taylor, which is like to have an abstraction that's actually, to work with an abstraction that's closer to what the user or the, would want or would be using, or what you develop as a sequencer. Like you want to work with an abstraction, like, I want to play a note, I want to stop playing a note, and so you're going to keep track of like what's playing.
It's kind of. I'm trying to remember how I edited this thing. His line 38, 39 comment looks like something I would write, but maybe that was somebody else.
This one, right.
Yeah.
And so I did dig
turn on the authors for a sec if you don't mind.
yeah, I would if I could get it out of Xcode, but I'll jump over to Fork.
You can get out of Xcode.
Oh yeah, show me how, please. I was trying. I was like having such an issue.
Is it Command Shift A?
Okay, so Command Shift.
Let's see.
Well, it's in that little menu, which is no. Gotta turn that off. To turn off what you just clicked.
Control Shift Command A.
Wow, that's a mouthful, but it's be good to know where it is in the menu, which I'm trying to describe. But yeah. Well, I think I reorganized so much of this, I guess, that it sort of obscures who really wrote the thing. You're muted, Matt.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so this log I think that we see here is going to be the v5 repo, and it's not necessarily going to include the whole history of it. But I think Fork does keep this whole history of it. There's this history view, and the history view I felt like this history view really showed me kind of like all the way back through. Oh, this is the tests, right? And then there's also the actual code as well. I looked through it last night, and it does seem like you wrote a bunch of it. Sequencer engine history, and this one like goes back a lot further, but yeah, it goes back to about 2020, so May of 2020.
But I think I didn't write is the actual code that schedules the notes
okay,
out to the
right.
Didn't do that. Just did a bunch of
Maybe
stuff on sort of reorganized.
If it wasn't Taylor, it was Jeff or me. So
okay, yeah. And honestly, it works fine. It's not even like, other than this issue, which is solvable. So like there's aspects of like the sort of the way I see it high level is essentially like that this class keeps track of playing notes, right? It also processes like two things, which is MIDI note. There's a MIDI note concept, and there's also this like MIDI event or the sequence event. So this sequence event and sequence note, and that's what this process function gets, right? So there's a sequencer scheduler that makes sure that the observer token like has the correct current sequence events and sequence notes, and then the audio unit that you start the sequencer with, it has this observer attached to it, so that when it's callback gets called, like when it's like real-time thread process gets called, like it has this observer attached to it, and then it calls what's in this function here, this process function, or yeah, something like that, right? So it's essentially like you've got the, Swift is scheduling, making sure that what Swift knows about the interface and like what people have added for notes, or like what the code has added into the Swift part of the sequencer. It has a callback that's sort of like there's a note in there that callback is just like it seems like this should be enough, and it generally is, because we're passing in all possible notes that have been sequenced and all possible events that have been sequenced, regardless of what time it is. So if we put like a million notes in there and a million events in there, yeah, maybe we should like rethink whatever. But I don't think that that's what the point of the sequencer is. The sequencer is really there so you can like out of the box just have a sequencer that works. Awesome, so whatever. And if you're gonna make like some crazy teched out sequencer where all these things are important, then yeah, like maybe make your own, and that's hopefully what this would help people to get to, like by going through some of how it works. So if we go in here, like there's this process events function that gets called first, and that's pretty simple. I'm gonna shut off these authors for now. I'm so glad that I knew you guys would show me, like I was like, oh, I can't find this thing, easily, the pros, right? So. All right, so in process events, right, there's this queue that you didn't just put it in, but you just converted it to the other kind of FIFO queue ring buffer style thing, and all this does is sort of says like, go through the sequencer events, right, and that are like in that queue and deal with them, right. So I kind of looked at this when I was looking at it, like deal with them as in like do what the sequencer events tell you to do, which is like seek to a position or like stop everything. Those are kind of the two things that this will interpret. You send these two types of events. And then the other kind of info that gets sent over here is sort of sequence notes, right? And there's another version of what sequence events are, which is like, I think, yeah, so there's sequence events and then there's sequencer events, right? So sequencer events are about playback of the sequencer itself, that is related to what notes are playing. So if you want to stop everything, you want to be able to shut everything off, which is why it's important that we have this playing notes concept. Then we don't have to like go through every single note that has been scheduled at some point to shut everything off. So you go into playing notes, you kill them, or you go seek to a position, which is another piece. So those are the sequencer events that are represented as sequence events, which you can think of as just like, these are sort of naked MIDI data, right? So this is like a CC or channel message, any other kind of like, some kind of aftertouch information or whatever. So that's what this sequence event will do. And some of them are, related to playback. Sorry. Yeah.
I thought they only did a couple things. Can we look at the?
Yeah, maybe that's the case. I thought that also covered the sort of the naked case, but where is this? I love when I can't jump to the thing. Here it is. So notes off for okay. So this one, these are just those sequencer events.
That's it. Yeah. It doesn't do
okay.
Much. I may have even added that. Can't remember.
And that's and that's like, it works. It does what it's supposed to do, and it's kind of like a good kickoff if you want to add more types of events.
Can we also see what sequencer note is?
Yeah, is that up here? No, it's in sequencer.
Because sequencer probably.
Yeah. So sequence event, so sequence event is just like sort of straight up MIDI message, and then sequence note is a struct of two MIDI messages, a note on message and a note off.
I see.
That's kind of that's how I'm generally seeing it.
Yeah.
So
I guess why not have these structures be less MIDI-ish? You know, like
Right.
why isn't a note, for example, note number, duration, start time?
Right.
You know,
And that's what they are in Swiftland,
yeah.
which maybe if you have a better term for the fantasy land of Swift. But generally, I think there's a thing. I think the sequence note. I don't even know. There's something. I think it's just a note. There's MIDI note. That's what it's called. That is exactly that. So there is a thing that is that, and it's at that higher level. So at that level of like processing, like I've been calling it like the schedule. It's the scheduling callback. It's not even like the actual MIDI block callback. It doesn't, but it's like basically like we sort of slowly tell our audio unit to make sure that these things are available for being sent to the system MIDI to like send MIDI messages. And so before you get there, those what we see here, I think it was here. No, sorry, over here. Before we get to this process function, right, this like sequence note and sequence event, this is sort of like put in place for us at this level of abstraction. So at the very sort of low level stuff, we're just saying like, okay, we have like somewhere at the higher level abstraction, someone said, I want to put a note in place. And down here, we're grabbing like, we have notes, we had sequencer events, and then also there's sequence events, which is just like, basically just like a message, or a single MIDI message. And so if I could just jump through again, like there's a little bit further we can go before that kind of becomes more apparent, but like if we find, I guess I'm just like point out MIDI note, the MIDI note structure class that exists. MIDI event. It's like I didn't prepare for this piece here, but somewhere it's there, and for some reason my like Apple clicking, my command click stuff isn't happening. So sequence.
You mean MIDI note data?
Is that what it is? Yeah, there's something at the higher level that is, it's like
Search for
essentially
MIDI note data.
Okay. MIDI note data.
Should be a MIDI data set, that Swift file.
Oh, there it is. Cool. Okay. Is this? It seems like this is it. Yeah, because but like you were saying, it's sort of like, do we have the position? Do we have the duration? What MIDI channel is it on? The basic stuff like velocity and the note number, right? So this is like that abstraction that Taylor, that I think you're talking about. And so that abstraction exists sort of like before you get down to the C++ code. C++ code, I think, is like getting past things like this, or like there's some place where it's I can find this stuff, but yeah, so we can get there. But generally, so this whole thing is like kind of, you have this thing of like we're saying, if we break this down into three things that are coming in, like three things are coming in here. We have well, okay, two things come in. We get like you know, sort of plain messages, right, that aren't organized as notes. Then we get this thing called a note, which is two messages at a time. So we get like kind of a packet of two notes for a note, for the note abstraction. Now, the first thing that this does is it looks to see like what's been queued up, right? So it doesn't make sense on the first run, like there's nothing going to be queued up. But after it's been run, like some of these events that came in, these ones, will, I think in this loop here, they'll turn into you know, these events that are here, right? So on successive runs, like process events will find things in the queue that are related to playback, and it'll deal with those. And then the next step is like, so you deal with those, like, you know, as long, if there are some of those sequence playback related events, if they're there, that's what that does. And then the next step is like you go through these comments here. I don't know, whoever wrote these are kind of, this is kind of like some of the oldest code in here, right? And so I've done my best to try to like stay away from changing this stuff, because I'm like, okay, this works generally. There's just some level of like ordering that is problematic. So in here we go through every single plain event, right? So like as this stuff comes in, there's plain events and then there's notes. So that's cool. We get the plain events and we go and do stuff with them. I haven't paid that much attention to like what's going on here. I just sort of took it for granted, and it doesn't seem to be affecting these next sections, which are
Oh, Matt,
here. What's that?
could I make a request here? Can you try not to
Yeah.
scroll so much?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
It's like,
Okay.
I think I'm getting
Sorry about
motion
that.
sickness or something.
Yeah. Call out wherever you want me to scroll to or whatever, and I will stop scrolling in general.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know, maybe we can like,
No, it's
you
dizzying.
could maximize
Bump the font size a bit.
Yeah,
you
okay.
could-
We can
you
do
can
that.
bump the font size to presentation maybe, and then you could also, you don't need to show the debug right now, so that would give you a little bit
Yeah.
more vertical space.
Toads. Great. Okay, cool.
And then we can just kind of sit there and look at one
Sweet.
thing
I appreciate
without
that.
scrolling or
Yeah. Sorry,
selecting
I know
constantly.
that could be really annoying, so sorry about that.
Or-
I remember
Yeah.
writing a lot of this code, so
Okay,
I think
cool.
it's going to be my fault, whatever it is. And I do remember making this choice about when, like, processing the note offs first and the note off second. It was
Right.
written in the context of I think a metronome or some other
Mhm.
percussive sequencing, and
Right.
so note offs didn't make as much of a big deal, right? Because
Right.
the samples themselves decayed.
Right.
So I think that's probably where there's some inherent assumptions that I was making that
Yeah.
reared their heads only now.
Yeah, like one shot, like the idea of a one shot trigger, right, is where it'll, if you have a sampler, you would like play the whole sample regardless. It doesn't have like an off, right? It's just off when it's done playing back. So that would be, if some of this was written for that sort of, model, then that makes sense.
Should still work, but if people are having
Yeah.
troubles, that's probably will go away.
But it really does work for almost all the cases. The real case where it doesn't work is like, so the first thing I did was I'm going to turn on this, and then I'm going to jump to different sort of branches, right? So the first, let me see if I can get to this one. So the first thing that I messed with, so from the latest in develop, which none of this code has been changed except on my branch. So like, here's my branch. You can ignore some of these like things here, because there's a lot of stuff I was like messing around with that's not something that I'm going to give. Or actually, I think I can jump back to the point where I hadn't just messed up a lot of stuff. I was just like monster style, just like I'm changing all sorts of stuff to learn things. So in general though, here it is. I'm going to stop scrolling, but we have, so up here, this section is, like I said, just dealing with like plain messages as they come in that aren't part of note on, note off stuff, right? So it's just like, oh, these other events exist. So you can kind of think of that as that's where the channel messages generally will be. Someone could get real tricky and weird and send note on and note offs just without like using that higher level abstraction, but that's kind of at your own risk. And so, so going along with what you're saying, Taylor, you kind of deal with it at that higher level of abstraction because that makes sense. You work with notes. That's going to be like a packet of two, events. Deal with it like that. If you send note ons and note offs just like willy-nilly, that's kind of going to be on, the developers to deal with what happens. So in this sequencer, we have the plain things get dealt with, and then in the original code, we're doing note ons first and then note offs, right? And so this will work in most cases, actually, because it's this is like that's the crux. That was like the first thing I changed. I was just like, oh yeah, let's just put note, where is it? Why isn't it showing me? Oh yeah, so I was like, why don't I just take the note ons and put them below the note offs, right? Thinking to myself like, yes, of course I'm going to process the notes that are currently playing, right? I want to process their note offs first so that they shut off. And I didn't look super hard into this. This is why the first thing I did was this, and that's when I put up the PR and it broke the test. And it was generally just because it was like, we did the note offs first, and so then it solved the actual playback, but it doesn't solve the test, right? And the test was
another question here.
Yeah.
Did you put the new? It seems like the new stuff that you were showing, which was in a separate project. It seems like that would be a perfect thing to put in a unit test. So is that now in a unit
Yeah.
test? Okay.
So,
good.
right, exactly. So that's where it gets kind of sticky. So I'm going to go through the solutions first and then talk about the tests as well. So like the solutions here was like the first naive one was just switch the offs and ons. And then I think something closer to what should actually be done is in this other branch I did where we actually it's more like this, where we process the playing notes for note offs for playing notes. Then we look for notes that are sort of to be scheduled, right? We look at basically what are the things that are not in the playing notes, and we trigger their note ons. Then we look at the or is that how it was? Shit, did I fuck it up? I don't know how I did these comments yet, but this is sort of like in process. So essentially, like we
make a general statement.
Yeah.
I just don't like this code.
Oh, that's fine. Really, this is like a whole exploration to just kind of peel apart how it is functioning
I
now.
don't mean your code.
No, I know.
I'm not criticizing
Yeah.
what you wrote.
I can tell.
The whole thing here.
I know.
It's just a block of ugh. Right?
I know.
Like,
I'm 100% blameless
really
over here.
Think about
It's totally fine.
what the fuck is this? Oh, excuse me. What is this doing? You know,
Well,
like
Yeah.
Be banned.
it needs. Yeah, I know. I'm banned already. God.
Oh my gosh, you.
Yeah.
No, I really
Okay.
understand. Like, because
No.
that's why I've been taking some time and being like, how am I gonna mess with this, or not? You
Yeah,
know?
but
And
I
so-
mean, okay, maybe
yeah.
you're going in this direction anyway, but we're already 45 minutes in here.
Oh shit! Oh man, it's been way too long.
Yeah.
Either way, yeah,
Just-
it's like.
I think we should try to keep it a little bit higher level, maybe. But the thing
Well, that
is,
was kind of the point, was to go into the details here, but yeah.
yeah, okay, but I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine. I'll cool it.
so here's the thing.
Yeah.
It would be nice if it kind of was more readable, and there was some sort of abstractions that you build up, so that everything. Maybe this is too good to be true, but I've been able to do it in other cases when I dealt with MIDI. So I made like this nice little like poly voice allocator class or something that I've used,
Yeah.
and that made it, that sort of pulled out some of the logic into elsewhere that I could go and unit test. That's another thing about this. Not to be too long-winded here, but I feel
No,
like
go for it.
it's a complicated bit of
stuff.
logic.
Yeah.
All right, this should
Yeah.
be pulled out into a separate class. It should have a separate unit test. It should have absolutely nothing to do with threading or all these other things that and events and all this stuff that the sequencer, deals with. It just completely separated out and tested and much easier to understand. That would be the ideal case.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you, and that's kind of where I was working towards. There's always two paths when I get into some kind of code that I want to do, and one is like, what's the perfect fix, and what's the getting it to work fix. And that's what I wanted to go over here. That was like the quick thing. The quickest fix was like reverse it, right? And that broke a test. How do I fix the test? I add another check for note offs, right? So we're checking note offs, and it's related to like, are we checking for new notes, or are we checking for notes that are playing, right? So we check for, do you see what I'm saying there? It's kind of like three things we're checking for, but we're doing it based on two different types of things. One is like the notes that are in the sequencer. The other one is the notes that the sequencer knows are playing. And so that was like the quickest way to fix it. And I think that that's what I'm going to do first, is I'm going to put up a PR that just sort of like makes the tests work as they do, which would actually solve all the problems that it currently has. Then I'm going to take this other branch of stuff that I have, which is what you're talking about, Taylor, and I'm going to break it down in a different way. So like one last bit here about what you just said, is sort of like this, I think I have it. I'm trying to find, I think I got the code somewhere. It might even be stashed, but whatever, I can just say it. So like this stuff here, like with an if, for instance, right? This if, like what the hell does it do?
You're sharing your
What is it?
iPad screen. You're sharing your
Oh,
iPad.
sorry. Okay, shoot. I knew this would bite me. All right, so this will be the last thing I sort of say about it, but I think it goes along with what you're talking about, Taylor. Where the heck is it? Okay, come on. You can do it, Zoom. All right. Refuse to pay Zoom subscription fees. Okay, so can you see Xcode again? All right. So we've got a lot of, like, these are like I said, my sort of brute force fix is to do, one check for note offs, and then another check for note ons, and then another check for note offs. And then what's happening inside these three loops, this is horribly inefficient, and this isn't what I want to exist in AK, but this was how we just make sure that the tests work in the current situation, which will make the sequencer do what it has done as in general, unless there's other issues. But like in this case, it'll make it work the way it should, which is great. Now, I'm totally not interested in blaming or anything, but like, So that's why I kind of approach it this way. I'm just like, oh yeah, it does these things. How can I make it work? Okay, this is how it will work. Then the long-term thing, the long game, which is actually what I've been spending most of my time on, is this other branch I have, which I'm not even going to show because it's very confusing. And that's like some other stuff where I break down the tests so that we can test like, any given scenario. We can test the scenario with any, possible, like we can check it with 48,000 kilohertz. We can check it with 44, we can check it with different buffer sizes. We can check it with loop on, we can check it with loop off. And a lot of those things are parameterized just kind of in the tests. All that parameterization of like, how would you use a sequencer? We can bang out like, 25 tests for the sequencer with all sorts of different things if we just make sure those parameterizations are possible. So anyway, this stuff here in these, like this loop code stuff, we don't need 3 loops. At most we need 2, one for the playing notes, one for not. But even so, we probably don't even need that. But what we do need, I think, the most is right here. This is my last thing I'm saying, is that when we check, this right here says, does this note off have, like, does this note have a note off message that should be triggered within this buffer size, right? So the current buffer that's processing what time it is and whether it should send MIDI on is right here. This is like piece of that, right? So we're doing that here. This one is for the current playing notes, right? I think this other one is going to be, this one's also for playing note. It's like this one triggers new notes, which means that now what we processed here, the playing notes might have new ones, right? So we check again. And what this does, it solves this one silly little thing that was really at the crux of the sort of overlap in MIDI ordering problem, which is just that if the note is smaller, like if we fix it, right? If we do the, offs first and then ons, any note that's smaller than the buffer size in sort of like its duration won't ever get its note off. And that's a problem. And that breaks tons of tests because all the tests are like, oh, do we get these things in the correct order? And it's like, what the heck? So that's why this brute force approach does it. What?
Can you say that particular condition again?
Yeah. So
slowly.
Okay. Yeah. So let's see. So in this case here, like the first, if we're dealing with just the note abstractions. Sorry, I'm trying to make it quick. I'll try to go.
Forget about the code. You were saying there's some condition of notes in which it outputs the wrong thing. What is that?
Okay. So when it outputs the wrong thing.
Yeah, I mean it does.
So when the end, yeah. So if you have two note 2 C3s triggered on the same channel, where the end of the first one is at the exact same time, right, as the note on of the second one, right? That's the overlap issue, and that shows up like if you have chords that share notes, it seems like the polyphony is wrong because
it's just a note, the same note right after, immediately after, and it gets that wrong.
Yeah. It's just a simple thing because it's like
that's pretty simple, but
it seems really simple, yeah. But what we're dealing with again, it's like we're dealing with a buffer size.
And we happen to not test that particular case.
Well, there's a lot of details here. It's not just that. It's like all the tests sort of test for a specific buffer size and a specific, and this is kind of just tertiarily related, but it is related. It's like it just comes down to kind of like which particular sequencer use case you're doing. Yeah. But that one thing, it's like putting notes on first solves a problem. I don't even want to think about what that problem is, but it does solve a problem. And then if you put the note offs first, that solves a problem. But then you need to do that third check, which is like, once I checked if anything playing has to shut off, right? This is what it is, Taylor. Me telling you slowly, sorry. I'm sorry. If anything playing needs to stop, we stop it. If anything that is existing that needs to get scheduled needs to start, we start it. If anything that we just started within this buffer needs to stop before the buffer is over, we have to stop those. We have to schedule that stop. So that's those 3 checks that we do with any data inside that loop. That's like kind of the most important thing that we do.
I mean, there's kind of this similar logic in the automation.
Exactly. Pattern is everywhere.
Well, okay, so go
ahead.
I definitely had my head more in the automation code, but I think the problem that I'm having here, at least, is that I haven't had my head in this code.
Right.
And so just seeing it immediately like this is a bit overwhelming.
I figured.
I don't really know exactly what's going on. I can't really follow along. So Yeah, we just need
That's
to
tough.
keep
I
it,
was
like,
really hoping that I
a
could get
little
you
bit
to
higher
see it.
level as far as like, at least in my view.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you should definitely PR this thing that is a fix, because I mean the
Mhm.
code's ugly. It's a little uglier now. Who cares? But then it would be really interesting to take a look at the sequencer
Yeah.
engine with a fresh eyes. And I think part of what is happening here is AudioKit has always been this, a Swift layer and then like Objective-C layer, or then and we get down to DSP. And once we're in the DSP, a lot of us were like, that's where we go, and that's where we start to go into like C programming, like really just
Right.
low levels, and we don't even think about, oh yeah, this would look a lot nicer if we had a class that handled a good portion of this. It's like we never
Right.
felt that was available anymore because we're down at the C level, but clearly
Yeah.
that's not true. So we need
Yeah, I
to.
mean, you can do a lot of nice abstractions in C++ while still being real time, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're
I
right.
mean,
I
even
think
really
that's
C,
true.
you can do nicer. Even in just C, you could do it probably nicely.
Well,
You just
another
make a little
common,
struct and some functions associated with it.
yeah,
It's not like
that's the thing about it.
need virtual functions or inheritance or anything here, you know?
Right. Over time, though, that's the thing is like I feel like I can see in the history of this feature, this feature set. I can see the history in it, and it's sort of like this thing gets added, and then maybe a bug gets fixed, and then another piece of it gets added, or another abstraction gets added. And it's just like the thing that's going to happen. So at some point, you kind of have this whole like, okay, we're going to go in and just make sure that everything is related to everything that's happening. It's like we have now, a vector holding playing notes. We also have a FIFO queue, that deals with like on threads and all that stuff. So it's like making sure that everything's consistent is a good idea, over time. And that's what I see also too. Like not just, oh, we didn't really use abstractions. It's just that like you didn't probably need the abstractions at the first version of the code because it was just doing less than what's happening now. Now there's more happening that was sort of added, incrementally. And I don't know, that's how I've seen it. I've looked at a lot of, it just really, it sort of sings to me, right? In my experience of like, large code bases at financial institutions where people are trying to like move from monoliths to microservices and all this shit. I'm just like, oh, I understand what's going on here. It's like we need a little refresh, and that's kind of what I see it. But because I completely agree, Taylor, what you're talking about, and I think one of the biggest things here for me is just these conditions. It's like if something, 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 something. Oh my god! And what it really means, it should just say if note should trigger now. Then the other one should be like if note is playing and should stop. It's like I wouldn't put that long of a variable name, but it's like essential stuff where you're just like, oh yeah, I got two lists of things, and there's maybe 2 or 3 variables about each note in each list that I need to check and go through it in like a loop and a half or something like that. So anyway, I'm gonna put my brute force thing up there, and and in general, like I hope to do actually like on my own time, like create a little sort of walkthrough of like how to use the sequencer and that kind of stuff. I've been wanting to do that stuff anyway. So
Are you under any time pressure to get stuff done, Matt?
Just to impress you guys, like just.
I just
it's
wonder,
like I can.
So this is your side
No, not.
project. This is you're not.
Yeah, basically, yeah. This is like I'm not like I have time that I've set aside for this kind of work. Like I've had time set aside for a while now for like a significant amount of time, not just like weekend work.
Because
So
what
like,
I think is
I'm
cool
generally
about one of the things I think is cool about AudioKit, and I suppose this goes for a lot of open source development,
yeah,
is that it's not tied to some
right
corporation, right?
Exactly.
It tells you what to do, gives you some deadlines. So we don't have to like rush to tack on another conditional to try to hit some particular test case.
Right.
Take a step back.
Yeah.
We think about how to organize this, how to make this nicer and easier for others to read and everything.
I totally agree.
That being said, you should make that first PR just so we can close that issue, because the only corporation like is me that I would love to have fewer issues on my plate. So if something can be cross-safe off even temporarily, that would be good.
No, I really appreciate that. There's a user who's trying to get this to work.
Counter.
I want to help them. Yeah.
Ari's bean counting those bugs.
Well, I gotta say,
no one's pressuring you to close all the bugs.
No, I guess that's
internal.
Yeah.
Well, it's just that I think there's like a service aspect, right? Like there are users who are trying to jump onto 5. I think that's important. Like I really like 5, and I want to encourage people to use 5. It's amazing. It's like, and we can make it even better, which is what you're sort of getting at, Taylor. I think like it's just that the experience of programming for a decade or more or whatever, you're going to be like, at a job, you're gonna be like, oh, I gotta fix this as soon as I can in the least dangerous way I can, and then you kind of like would dream like, I wish I could something, and then, but in this case, we're kind of in the middle of that, right? You're like, oh, I want to help a user, I want to help a developer, but I also want to make this awesome so that even further, people can be like, wow, that's a great way to do that. It makes a lot of sense, and now I can even learn about what it's doing. So I really agree with you, and I agree with both. I'm a very agreeable person.
Do Marcus and Brian have any thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I'm very interested in the PR itself and what it is, Matt, you expect to test it. So like
Right.
a lot of what we covered tonight is there's existing tests. So you have an expectation like, oh, hey, whatever it is I'm going to do, these tests. So we should make sure those tests are the right tests. I think, Taylor very eloquently said, whoa, this is old code, probably could be better, which means those tests may or may not. I would just like to see the use case as a part of your PR. So when someone was looking at this issue, they could go like, oh,
Totally.
I see what Matt was trying to do. Oh,
Yeah, that's as
he
easy as
did
adding a
this, it
test
didn't
that's
work.
explicitly for this, like test same
Yeah.
note twice in a row.
Right.
I think that would be a great
Sure.
addition to the test. I gotta say, like, one thing, like from a really high level on this is people like have this image of open source where it's like we all working to make things better, and people are like adding on this thing and it's good and this, when really it's just a set of people getting more like disgusted by other people's code to the point where they want to rewrite it. Like I'll look at somebody's code and I'll be like, I can't believe they use these variable names. This is so confusing. Oh, they didn't have tests, or it's just a series of being disgusted. And now you got down to a place where, we're disgusted by the sequence engine. And so it's time to rewrite it because it's disgusting. So that's the truth behind open source. It's less, it's more negative than it is positive, but it's hopefully that leads to progress.
Oh, come on.
I was trying to be positive about it.
No, you're progressive. You're progressive.
Truth about open source development.
It's true. We're all.
Well, it's a really cynical view, right? But it's like every time you get disgusted by code, it's an opportunity to create code that sort of has a level of self-documentation to it, and also is like a chance for you to challenge yourself to write something that's clear enough that a bad coder or whatever person you would get disgusted by would be like, hey, that's a great job. And so I think you have a lot of opportunity, even if you're cynical, because I'm pretty cynical as well, not in public, but like it's like I'm right there with you guys. Like there's a lot of chance and opportunity for positivity as well. I think it's fantastic, and I agree. But I agree with Ari.
One thing I want to share though about like AudioKit, some of the use cases that AudioKit is intended for, and the place of the sequencer within all that is the sequencer is at a layer, it's the Swift layer, where it can be used by folks who have completely different, like radically different use cases for AudioKit. So if I'm someone who wants to make my own custom DSP and now I got to use AudioKit this way, if I'm someone who just wants to string nodes together, I'm writing a game engine or I'm doing something simple, the sequencer is valuable for everyone. So I just feel like of all use cases, this one's really worth. Tonight's discussion was really good, very healthy.
Cool.
And I think the outcome of it will benefit like the maximal number of users of AudioKit. We're not geeking out on some stupid tiny little corner use case, right? This is going to benefit everyone. So this is really good.
Awesome. Yeah, like Taylor, I expect you to have like, some serious comments on my code. I want to learn something. So teach me, tell me something. When I get this stuff up, and I do something further than that first initial thing, because that's just gonna solve a problem. But then the next one will solve and do the real stuff. So it's super.
I'm just personally, I'm all about just breaking things up into testable pieces. That's it. Just if it starts to get complicated, try to pull it out, test it separately. Yeah, I was once my old job. I was once chided for writing too many unit tests.
Oh, okay, good.
And I wear
That's
that as a
nice.
badge of honor.
Whoa, what?
We're birds
In
of
my
a
job,
feather, man. The same thing.
my job, we pay people by the unit test.
Really?
Just kidding.
Wow.
Just kidding.
Yeah. No, I was working.
Testable.
I was working in
Go
the under the research department at this, and researchers aren't so big on software engineering, so.
I feel that. Yeah, that's all about like throwaway Python code, just to get the results into a spreadsheet or something so you can do, whatever. That's awesome. Slash not. Well, let me ask you guys a question. Here's a trivia question. Maybe another last thing. If maybe you all know about this, I don't know. But in the test for the sequencer, essentially we write a MIDI block, right, that sort of collects the events that the sequencer sequences, right? So the test runs, it says like, so down here, sort of like, here's a test. This is a basic one that I love. Make a sequencer, or we make a note event sequence. And then we add a note to this, and then we send it into the observer test. And the observer test is this like, a callback mechanism that can record what notes and when. And then we check.
I wrote all this.
Okay, great. So now, so there's two parts that are sort of like this one. Maybe I could take this one offline with this sort of specifics. But there's lots of hard coded values in here. In my other branch, I like just tore it apart and started parameterizing the test so I could do many different scenarios that I thought were important. But this part here, where is it? Up here. So this part here, I think this is your original code. Tell me if it's not. I think yeah. So this is the original code, yeah, because there's no changes. So this here, like this AU event sample time immediate, the creation of the MIDI timestamp using this sample time that comes in with the block execution, and then subtracting that sample time from this, or subtracting the AU event sample time immediate. Like this value here is sort of a magic value in OS. Right, OS 10, so, or whatever it is, iOS, and it gives me this like really big, looks like an epic or something, but it's a negative number. And I've dealt a little bit with sort of sample times and other pieces of the sort of like AV Foundation stuff, and sample times and host times and that kind of stuff. But this piece here sort of bugged me out, because I believe that like when I run this test, and it passes, right? But if I change this to 0, right, and I run it, it definitely doesn't pass. And it's not something I want to necessarily get that deep into, but part of it is because the timing is off, and I wanted to like use that in a new like sort of version of these callback things. I wanted to use the timing, and I was wondering how much in the test, like how much of this is unit testing because we're using this value, which is like a sort of, I think it's a real-time actual value. And so I was like, oh, are we leaning towards a sort of integration style test as opposed to a more unit style test? It's like, I think for me, I got to the point where I was like, okay, in this function where this block gets run and I'm collecting events, I'm just going to track how many frames that this test has processed, right? I'm going to collect the number of frames. I'm not going to pay attention to whether it's accurate, if it did process those frames at some correct time. But either way, I was sort of like, maybe somebody can explain what's happening here in terms of like making this MIDI timestamp, just on a very general sense. Like, if not, that's okay. But
Well,
I also
me,
take my
even though
question
I
off
think I
air.
wrote this code, I don't remember.
Yeah, that's okay.
I don't remember the
But yeah,
details.
but some of the stuff that I have already been working on, I'm not going to sort of show the code because it's a lot more complex or whatever in terms of just like, oh, what's that? Lots of changes. Like the length of the loop, whether it's looping, the number of loops, the tempo, lots of hard-coded sample. Like for instance here, frame count is actually buffer size or like block size or frame count. And it's always set to the sample rate, which actually like kind of creates these sort of ghost test passes in certain scenarios. So that's some of the stuff that I'm going to approach, that I've been approaching, like changing some of the stuff, like parameterizing a lot of these sort of magic numbers. And then this one here is this is cool. It's testing the accuracy of these timestamps, right, in relation to like sort of this hard coded, this hard coded and this like fairly useful, but still not quite enough of a comment for like what's going on in this weird line. And that's whatever. I don't need to get super into. I'm not interested in blame. It's just like I want to know exactly how to write this kind of weird stuff. And part of it for me was like, what is this? Like, if anyone can explain that, I would send you.
You mean like what? You mean what sample time immediate is, or what it means?
Yeah, like what, or both. Yeah, like what is it going to return? It's going to return like a number, right?
Well, I think it's because probably it needed to be sample time immediate some big value, and it needed to be subtracted off.
Yeah.
So
okay.
You can see in the documentation what sample time immediate means.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's because for me, what I saw was basically that this like doing this thing here, the subtraction, gives you sort of like instead of starting at 0, if you just had the sample time, you would be starting at some negative number, and then when you subtract this or something like that.
Where else, if you search for sample time immediate, where else is it used? Just search for it.
Let's see, lots of instruments.
Okay, so there are sequencer entry. Look, sample time immediate plus offset. So we're just recovering offset. That's all this is doing. We added sample time immediate to it. Now you got to subtract it off to get the actual offset, because that just tells core MIDI, I want it as soon as possible plus this offset.
Okay, right.
And this kind of,
that's what I thought. Okay, cool. I was having trouble sort of like using it actually, but like getting something out of it that made more sense. So either way, some of the when I started
documentation for that somewhere. Like if we just go to the definition, just jump to the definition of that.
Where is that?
I guess I'll let you. That's the first one on the menu, but.
Sorry, that's horrible. It does exist though. I've seen it. I've seen the.
So no overview available, but if you go to the header where it's actually defined.
Yeah, that's right. Okay,
then
I've been there. Oh shit! It's not letting me go. So something's wrong with my.
Something's kind of up with your Xcode there.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. Let's see.
Let
me start it.
You do Command Shift O from Xcode. If you do Command Shift O, and you just start typing AU sample time,
like that. There we go. Perfect. Oh, that's so good. All right. So callers of a scheduled parameter block and the MIDI event block, which is the one we're dealing with, can pass this to indicate that the event should be rendered as soon as possible in the next cycle. Okay. A caller may also add a small sample. Hey, I read this. It's so strange. Yeah. Anyway, I think it just my problem that I had probably points to some kind of like other bug I had, but like you're saying essentially that's a great thing. It's getting, what did you say? It's like getting back the offset. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I think when I encountered this code, I mean, one of the things I did was write all those unit tests. Or
totally.
Whatever tests. But maybe they're integration tests, maybe the unit tests, whatever, they're tests.
Yeah.
And
where was I?
And it already was adding in that sample time immediate, so you got to get subtract it out to get the.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, great. Anyway, thanks for going through all this stuff with me, guys. You guys rock. It's really great to get your feedback as well, Marcus and Brian. Anyway, yeah.
It's the Taylor and Ari show. Matt show.
Well, what else is new? What are you guys all working
on? Saturday night.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
Hey, any updates, Ari? Anything going on? Taylor, Ari?
Well, I mean, I think this has gone on long enough, but AudioKit now has, so the 3 main repos, AudioKit UI, and Cookbook, all have a main and develop branches that all point to the appropriate dependency, and they all have some sort of continuous integration. So hopefully that'll keep them, the main trio and the develop trio, all working together pretty well. That's the main thing I did this week.
Nice.
Cool. Well, I guess until next week.
Mhm.
Cool.
I'll talk
Wow.
less
Hey,
next
thanks
time.
for the deep dive, guys. That was awesome.
Thanks, Matt.
Educational.
See you guys.
Thanks.
Sure.
Toodles.